I the a-hole for not wanting to maintain a bond with my granddaughter after my daughter asked her uncle to walk her down the aisle at her wedding? For context, a month before my daughter married her husband, I filed for a divorce from my wife. My wife had emotionally cheated on me for a couple of months, and I couldn't really get over it. Now, while the timing wasn't great, I just did not want to be with my wife anymore, and I did not want to pretend to be happy with her. My wife and I informed our daughter, and we were honest about what happened since our daughter was an adult. However, my daughter was devastated and asked how could I do this to her just a month before her wedding. She said her mom clearly regretted what happened and was desperately trying to save the marriage. But my daughter said regardless, she understood my decision to divorce. But why would I do it just a month before her wedding and the happiest day of her life? The whole thing was a mess. But my daughter did get over the shock after a week or so. But my daughter was really angry with me. And even though I was invited to the wedding, she withdrew the invitation for walking her down the aisle, and she asked her uncle to walk her down the aisle instead. It did really hurt me. But it was also my daughter's special day, so I didn't want to throw any fuss. And at the end of the day, I was happy for my daughter. She at least did the father-daughter dance with me. However, after the wedding, I gradually distanced myself from my daughter. My daughter understood the reason for it. A year later, my daughter apologized for not asking me to walk her down the aisle. I told her it was okay, and there was no reason to apologize, but there was also no reason for us to have a bond anymore. My daughter thankfully understood my decision. It hurt me telling all these things because my daughter looked really sad. But it was time I put myself first. A few months ago, my daughter gave birth to her first baby. And over the past couple of months, my daughter has been calling a lot and apologizing and crying because she really wants her daughter to have a bond with me. But the truth is, I just don't care. I feel emotionally detached, and at this stage in my life, I don't want to put forth effort into someone who betrayed me so badly. Am I the a-hole? Dear sir, you have to be going through a seriously painful and emotional situation right now. Cutting ties with your daughter, especially over something as significant as her wedding day, it's a decision that has to be weighing heavy on your heart. I want to share my perspective, though, on how you and your daughter both could have handled this situation differently. I have to admit that while I was reading your post, I became immediately upset with your daughter and figured her mother had something to do with her decision. I'm still not convinced she didn't, but then I realized there's always two parts to a story. So first, let me say this. I understand your side perfectly. The relationship between a father and a daughter, it's a unique bond. It includes love, guidance, and above all, support. It forms naturally over the years, and it's understandable that when you've been asked to step aside, especially on a significant date like your daughter's wedding, it can feel like a betrayal, one that cuts like a knife. I'm sure it hurt you when your daughter chose her uncle over you. I don't know if it was your brother or a wife's brother. Either way, it was such an important role in her life that she chose this man for. You probably thought about everything you've been through as her parent and wondered why would she have turned to her uncle over you? After all, you divorced your wife, not your daughter. At least not right away, you didn't. At any rate, the wedding day is about family and tradition. It's about the people who've always been there. I feel as though your daughter stripped away part of that legacy by asking someone else to give her away at the wedding. Everyone knows that role is reserved for the father of the bride, traditionally anyway. But then there's also the issue of the timing of the divorce. You mentioned that the divorce happened only 1 month before her wedding. Now that timing, it was critical. You might see the timing of her decision as unreasonable or harsh as well, but we all know that weddings are planned far in advance, at least a year in advance usually. Still, you may have felt that she's punishing you for a decision that was part of your own personal journey. Divorce, as we all know, can be messy, and it's emotionally complicated, but not just for the couple, also for the children, even adult children. Though you may have seen the divorce as necessary for your own well-being, it's possible that your daughter saw it differently. Weddings, they have a way of amplifying feelings of loyalty, family, unity, and tradition. Her asking you to step aside, maybe that was her way of coping with this sudden emotional shift she experienced due to the divorce. The hurt and anger you feel about being excluded, those feelings are absolutely valid. It's a huge emotional blow, especially when you want to be there for your daughter in the way that only fathers can dream of being. The idea that your daughter would take such a drastic step after years of sharing this father-daughter bonding moments together, it might feel like an insult to everything you thought your relationship stood for. But now let's consider your daughter's side. Her actions may have stemmed from a place of hurt or emotional confusion. You can't take that away from her. From her perspective, the timing of divorce so close to the wedding may have left her feeling insecure or unsure about the stability of the family she came from. Weddings symbolize the start of a new chapter, but they can also trigger a lot of reflections on the past. It's possible that in her mind, the traditional father-daughter moment of walking down the aisle with you may have felt like it was no longer appropriate or even possible given that emotional turmoil surrounding your divorce. She may have felt that having you walk her down the aisle would have been awkward or even complicated for her, given the state of her relationship with you at that moment. The fact that she turned to her uncle for the role, well, that may indicate that to her, family wasn't about the biological connection, but more about finding someone who could offer her the emotional support that she needed during such a stressful time in her life, and your life as well. Maybe she saw her uncle as being more emotionally stable or someone who could offer her the peace and reassurance that she felt she may have been missing from her relationship with you at the moment. In making the decision to uninvite you from that role, though, and not the wedding altogether, it's possible that your daughter was acting out of her own sense of, we'll say, self-protection. Maybe she was already feeling overwhelmed by the change in the family dynamic, and removing you from such an emotionally charged event may have helped her regain a sense of control over what was happening in her life. It's also possible that for her, the pain of seeing you walk down the aisle and being reminded of the divorce, it might have been too much for her to handle. It's definitely something to consider. You mentioned that you cut ties with your daughter over this, and this is a huge step and a decision that will have long-term consequences. By now, you already know that. It's easy to feel justified in your actions, especially when the hurt is so deeply felt. But it's important to also consider the lasting effects of such a drastic choice. Severing ties with your daughter, especially over a disagreement that stems from such an emotionally charged situation, sir, it might make it harder to repair the relationship in the future. I'm going to assume that you want that. While your feelings are completely valid and the pain you experience is completely undeniable, the long-term damage that might be caused by the separation could be something that both of you will regret down the line. Emotions can cloud judgment. And it's easy to believe that cutting off all contact is the only way to protect yourself from further hurt. I beg to differ. But then you took things a step further by rejecting any type of bond with your granddaughter. That child is innocent. It's like you're taking out your feelings against your daughter on your child. You have to ask yourself whether your daughter would have called you after a whole year if she wasn't getting ready to have a child. Hearing about that news so late, that's a whole nother insult to injury. You have to ask yourself, why now? Your daughter may have regretted her actions, and that's hopefully why she's been calling constantly with all the late apologies. A wedding is an emotional whirlwind, and sometimes people act impulsively, not fully understanding the weight of their decisions. Your daughter might have looked back and wished she had handled things differently, and way sooner. Sometimes, though, giving space to process emotions, it can lead to healing and possibly reconciliation later on. I want that for you and your daughter, and hopefully you do too. But to answer your original question, are you the a-hole for not wanting to maintain a bond with your granddaughter after your daughter asked her uncle to walk her down the aisle? Well, I have to be honest, there is no clear-cut right or wrong here. It's an emotional situation with a lot of different layers. It's not wrong to feel hurt, angry, or even betrayed by your daughter. Those are natural responses when you feel excluded. You can't help but to also feel devalued, especially by someone you love, your daughter. But still, cutting ties completely? I don't think that's the best way to resolve things, especially if there's a goal of healing and eventually rebuilding the relationship with your daughter or building a new one with your granddaughter. You might want to consider where there is some middle ground where you can express your hurt and disappointment without severing the bond forever. Could you maybe in time come to a place of understanding with your daughter, even if it takes some time? Could you both eventually sit down and talk about your feelings, the divorce, and how the wedding situation made you both feel? Sometimes relationships that seem irreparable can still be healed if you both are open to communication. Now, healing may not happen overnight, but it's still possible with time and a willingness to understand each other's perspective. As painful as this moment is, remember that it doesn't necessarily define your entire relationship with your daughter. There are many ways to move forward. Whether you choose to reach out, give her space, or find a way to process this on your own before deciding what to do next. So I encourage you to ask yourself, what do you ultimately want from this relationship moving forward? Do you want a path of reconciliation, or do you feel that the wound is too deep to repair? Understand that your own needs in this situation is going to help guide you in the coming weeks and months. Boy, this is a tough situation with no easy answers, but acknowledging your hurt, expressing it in a healthy way, and being open to the possibility of healing, it can provide you with the clarity you need to move forward, whether that's through reconciling with your daughter or learning to come to terms with the decision you've already made. Good luck to you, sir. I'm glad you found your way out of a marriage that no longer served you. You did the right thing there. I'm also glad you decided to attend your daughter's wedding, even though you weren't allowed to walk her down the aisle. That took a lot of courage, and swallowing your pride to even show up. And you are to be commended for that. And I believe you made the right decision there too, to be there. My heart goes out to that newborn baby girl, your granddaughter. But this situation brings me to a different but somewhat related issue, and that's how much crap are we expected to accept from our own family simply because there's a biological connection there? Are we supposed to just let family walk all over us? When do we decide to put our own feelings and well-being ahead of others? I don't know. I guess I'll have to cover that in another video. But until then, be true to yourself and don't let anyone make you feel guilty for putting yourself first. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.